Hello everybody and welcome once again to another little video. This little video is all about this lovely man called Robess. Robess is a distant acquaintance of mine. He's active on Skype and obviously on YouTube. He's a good man. First thing I'll say, he's a good man. He's standing up and doing his bit. I don't entirely agree with all of his efforts or all of his methods, should I say, and some of his terminology and use of language could be tightened up a little bit. But in general, Rob's going in the right direction. He's been doing videos, it says here, for 3 years. So he's been quite active on this path of studying law. It's about the time I got into this, actually. But Rob, I think he got into a lot of the free man on the land stuff. He keeps attacking this "you're not a person" stuff. He's obviously had, I haven't seen the early stuff very much. He's obviously had some sort of run-in with the police before. I am aware that he's got a personal issue with the legal society and the local authorities in relation to his sister, or something to do with the sister's kids being taken into foster care, I believe. So he's obviously got some pretty emotional, personal connections to combating any kind of legal attack upon his sister and his family, obviously. But he's been doing it, he's been doing his bit. He's been going through all his little videos and giving updates about what he understands the law to be and what his opinions are on the legal society and the system. And he goes on and makes videos here. Look, Robert has just declared war on the legal system, part 1, 2 and 3. Now, I wouldn't really go around saying such things as declaring war on anything, really. He's quite, he comes across as quite a confrontational man. I mean, he's a Glaswegian guy. I'd be surprised if he wasn't a little bit in for a few Glaswegian kisses. I think, is it a Chelsea kiss, Glaswegian kiss, headbutts? But, so I've been following him for a while. I've been trying to help and aid him as best I can with my few words. But Rob's very, he's an independent man. He can stand on his own 2 feet. Just an example of some of the things he gets up to.
Secretary of State, you have no lawful right to put anything on my property. I'm claiming it as my property. Anyway, people, again, Robess strikes again. My clamp, my property. If you like this information, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Robess, I'm also on Facebook, Robert Sproul.
There we go. So he takes clamps off his vehicle. Which is fine. I mean, I think
registered. They wouldn't have registered the family name. It isn't registered my legal name. The only thing that's binding me with this fucking muppets is the number plate. I'm going to attack that now because I want that after that, because that's my property and I claim all property rights there. Anyway, people, again, Robess attacks the DVLA. As a message to the DVLA, you can kiss my fucking ass and so can the Secretary of State.
Yeah, okay. So he's right in one sense that this is my property. You have no right to stick clamps on it, which is quite right. But you can see how heated he is about this. You just take the clamp off, leave it by the side of the road, go on about your day, or take it home if you want to secure it. And yes, Rob goes into what he wants to do about billing them for securing their property. Because the fact that this is a clamp is immaterial. It could be a hat, could be a bag, could be a mobile phone. Someone's left their mobile phone on your car or in your car. It's irresponsible to just throw it in the bin. They might like it back. So just because this thing's a heavy bit of metal, take it home, look after it, write them a letter, say, oh, by the way, you need to pick up this thing. I'm holding it for you for safekeeping. It's obviously at cost to me. You can have some fun with that. I'm not really going to go into that kind of detail because that's not the point of the video. It's more about a point about the free man of the land stuff mixed with some of the Carl Lentz stuff. If you deviate at all from keeping it very concise and simple and not getting into other realms of misinformation, then things can escalate quite quickly. For example.
Hello everybody, my name is John King, but my birth name is John Harrower.
Okay, I mean when I first saw this I was like, hang on, my name is John King but my birth name is John Harrower. I mean as if I'm supposed to understand what he's talking about there, but I mean That's the first guy I've come across anywhere on YouTube or in real life who's introduced himself in such a manner. So it's John King, but his birth name is John Harrower. So is that because his parents have assigned him a name and he's changed it himself, or is it because he doesn't accept the legal name that his parents registered with the birth as a birth certificate, and now he's saying, well, now I'm going to call myself John King? There's no explanation for it, but hey, he seems to be quite happy in that, and who am I to criticise what a man calls himself?
On the 20th of June, I was falsely imprisoned for the charge of contempt of court. And the reason this happened was because
Right, falsely imprisoned for the charge of contempt of court. Okay. Yeah, I mean, contempt of court is usually a disrespectful or discourteous manner in court. In court. Okay. Now, there are some certain benefits of being in contempt of court, because the only courts that have the power to fine or imprison, as in Blackstone's dictionary, are the king. It's the king's jurisdiction. Okay, so as soon as some people start threatening you with contempt of court, what they're basically doing, and they're calling in the law of the land, and they're calling in essentially you can evoke they're evoking the Queen on your behalf to say, oh, let's bring it on. So it's a nice way to actually know that you're in a common, the jurisdiction shifts rather rapidly when they start threatening you with, they shouldn't be threatening you, but in this case, he was imprisoned, falsely imprisoned. I don't know if it's falsely imprisoned. I'll come to how exactly he may have been accurately imprisoned for contempt of court. Because remember, if someone invites you to their little dance hall, their little ball game, or their tennis court, their squash court, this is how I try to explain it to people. If you're John McEnroe and you're the greatest tennis player in the whole world, okay, I know I'm going back a few years, but let's just pretend we're John McEnroe and you're the greatest, or Boris Becker, something like that. You're the greatest tennis player in the world. You play on a tennis court, okay, and against you will be another opponent. And you've got, obviously, the court is laid out. There's markings on a tennis court in a certain way. You have to throw the ball up in a certain manner and serve it to the other side. Can't hit the net. There's a white line on the net. There's white lines on the floor. And there's an umpire. Okay, now the umpire doesn't do schmidt. Yeah, the umpire keeps a track of the scores. Oh, well done. Touche. Good touch. You're winning. Good point. You score that one. And basically they don't really have to do anything. They obviously make sure the rules are being followed. Like if the ball was on the line, as McEnroe used to go and scream about quite a lot, and the linesman called it wrong, the umpire would, he'd be the overriding authority on that and say, well, you know what, I'm up here on my high seat so I can get a good view down on the line, and he at any time can take people's calls of in or out on face value as advice, but he ultimately has the final say whether or not he will go ahead with that call from his umpire, or as the judge, if you like, as the umpire, the judge, he'll say, actually, I'm the judge, I'm going to call that one in. But of course, he should not be favouring one side. He has to be impartial. That's the nature of his role, his character, his persona. So that's essentially a courtroom. So imagine a court is no different, all right? And, in tennis, you might watch Wimbledon, you might hear court violations and stuff like that. You're going to be deducted a point, which is an immersive fine within a society of tennis, the tennis society. So you start throwing your racket around, swearing on court, doing all the good stuff McEnroe used to get up to, then you're going to find yourself being penalised in some way. Same in boxing. A boxing ring is just a court with a certain, they call it a ring, but it's still just a court with rules, with an umpire in the middle to make sure things are going as they should be. And you'll find this in many sports. Football pitch, no different. Rugby pitch, no different. The referee is essentially the independent judiciary member or a judge, just there to keep the rules of the game being played in a fair manner, so both teams have a good shout. And that probably harks all the way back to the oldest trial that we know of, which is trial by combat, where you have people meet and beat each other over the head with clubs and fight in that manner. Because there are only a few trials that are historically relevant to us, and to be in contempt of court means that you're not doing you're pissing off the game. McEnroe throwing your racket around. You got Zidane. Was it Zidane who headbutted a guy at the World Cup? You got Eric Cantona drop kicking the audience, the public. You got all kinds of misbehaviours over the year, and these things are usually punished. Now, in a courtroom setting, you're technically every court that has the power to fine or imprison is the Queen's court. So the Queen becomes immediately. It's like the Queen has mysteriously come in. And as I've said in my previous video, the Queen is not technically it's not a who. The Queen is a title. It's a belonging, and it belongs to Elizabeth Windsor. Okay, she is the incumbent Queen of our country. It's her title. It's her property, if you like. But as soon as the Queen, God save the Queen, and all the national anthem rhetoric, is the Queen is the fountain of justice that all our laws are stemming from. Okay, so in any court that somehow mysteriously gets the power to fine or imprison, becomes the Queen's court immediately, and the Queen and then it's up to the people to evoke that court. Now, if you're in a court which you're not evoking the Queen and the common law and the law of the land, then by all means you're going to still be in their tennis court playing against McEnroe when you're not a tennis player, you're a badminton player. So can you imagine turning up to a tennis court with a badminton racket, and you're trying to hit that tennis ball back and wondering why your strings are breaking and your bat's breaking and you're looking like a fool and typically, and this is very common, is that people start screaming at the judge, very much like the BCG guy. No, not the British Constitution Group guy, what was his name? Roger Walker, was it? Roger Hayes, sorry, Roger Hayes. The guy who, famously ran into and overtook a courtroom and the judges had to evacuate. And he arrested a judge and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's totally uncivilized behaviour. And as corrupt and as heinous as the judge may be or may not be, in your view, he's innocent until proven guilty. And going into a place of work where he has a difficult job to do, and trying to arrest him is bad form, as far as I'm concerned. If you turn up to a tennis match as a badminton player and you start shouting and you start blaming the umpire as to why you're losing, can you see how ridiculous that is? And that's essentially what's been going on. You've been invited in you've been invited in to play tennis, and you turn up in badminton because badminton is what we all play. That's the law of the land. Let's just use that analogy. So we set up a tennis court, and it's kind of a trick in a way. But the thing is, you have to go there because you're summoned. But until you set the record straight and tell them, hang on a minute, what is this? And they'll say, oh, this is a tennis match. Why am I here when I'm not competent to play tennis? I play badminton. Oh, no. You trust me, you'll be fine. Just come on in here. And they'll try and give you the razzmatazz of like, hey, okay, so you're a badminton player, I understand. Why don't you accept this guy here this is Andre Agassi? And you'd be like, right, and he's a qualified tennis player, yeah, okay, and he's going to represent you in the tennis game. And you're like, oh, okay, Andre Agassi, yeah, so well, he seems like he knows his stuff. He's got a lovely long hair and a lovely headband, and he serves really well, and he's got a good net game. Yeah, all right, I'll let Andre Agassi stand in for me. The thing is, Andre Agassi, even though he's going to be playing on the tennis court and getting his ass beat, you're the one who's going to be paying the time in prison for the charges and stuff. So contempt of court is very much like that. You have refused Andre Agassi. They've offered it, you've refused it, but yet you're still in their court and you're swinging your badminton racket around, you're screaming at the judge, I'm not a person. I know my rights. I'm a free man. I don't know, whatever you want to say, or not say, or do. Best not to speak really, but just to put in notices as to the true nature, very important word, true nature of your appearance, be it special or otherwise. So when people say I was wrongfully imprisoned for contempt of court, as is the case with this John Harrow, but my birth name is John King, or whichever way round he said it, I'll have to take his word on that he was wrongly imprisoned or falsely imprisoned, because if he was wrongly or falsely imprisoned, then surely you would hold the people to account.
Refused to accept the legal fiction's name, Mr. John Harrower, which is not who I am, and I have verified in law that my name is John Harrower without a title and without uppercase letters.
Yeah, he's right to attack the title. A title. Once someone gives you a title, this is why no one will ever write to you from a corporation or a company. They'll always write to you as a Mr. John Harrow because they want you to be bound by the prescribed rules of that title. So once you are entitled, you are then bound by the parameters of that title, if you like. So, for example, titles of nobility are the classic examples. So you've got was it king? Is it viscounts? Is it? And then you got like lords and barons and things like that. And now they're all specific to these are titles granted by the Queen. Okay, now barons being the lowest title in the land, of the nobility. Sorry, the lowest title. The barons have the lowest title, and the barons had historically were the people who owned a castle with a bit of land around it and were designated as basically the muscle of the crown I suppose the crown of the monarchy, so that in times of war they would have to ensure that they could meet their levy for the king, and obviously to impress the king you would probably provide as much as you can to the highest quality and standard as you can. And now what happens? This is we might as well deviate a bit and go on to Magna Carta because it's this is important that people get their head around this. Is that Magna Carta was a revolt, a civil war within the nobility, not you and I, the people. The people went around picking their nose and ploughing the field and being downtrodden as usual. All right. The barons basically was it John? John was running around taking shit. He was just taking shit. Put it simply, he was taking stuff off people, whether it be land, titles, money, whatever. He'd say, "Oh, I need that. I'm the king. Give me that. That's mine. Yeah. Well, you were a baron. Well, whatever. I'm taking that. Oh, lady, someone with no fucking man to stand up for you. Well, you don't need this bigger house. Stuff like that. He's just taking shit to fund his war and his goals and his ambition, as of by right." Back in the day, you're divine right king, so you have the divine right. You are king because essentially God has made it so. That was the belief. Don't giggle. And so you can go around and do what you want. Now, the barons at the time, and I recommend you read a lovely book by my personal favourite man in his history. Is David Starkey. He's absolutely, he nailed it down. He's gone on a little rabbit hole mission to go out and find and read and research the documents. He knows Latin to a competent level, and he's a brilliant mind, quite simply. But his book kind of lays it out. If you want to go reading about the history of the Magna Carta, if you really feel like you want to go in and explore it in greater detail. More detail about Magna Carta, then David Starkey is a very good authority on the subject. But essentially, the civil war within the nobility, the barons did all kinds of, you could say, mischief in order to preserve. It was self-preservation in a nutshell. Magna Carta is self-preservation within a very despot system of king has divine right granted by God to do as he wishes, as he see fit, for the benefit of him and his kingdom, right? Now, barons are like, oh, God, that means we're going to go back to peasantry class if he carries on like that. There's no reason why he couldn't, the king couldn't just strip everyone their titles and reassign it all out. So they basically did all kinds of nonsense to ensure self-preservation. And eventually, obviously, they got the king to a position where he had to agree. But it's not really Magna Carta and King John, is not really the enshrining factor of Magna Carta and all these rights that people like to hark back to. It was very much John's son who was later then he voluntarily agreed and bound himself to the principles of Magna Carta. I think it was in 1225. And it's pretty much from that point on where the principles of Magna Carta and that whole big rebellion really became the big enshrining, powerful liberty document that it is and revered as today. But again, it had no. I mean, if you were in Yorkshire picking your nose, ploughing a field all day long as a peasant, you really, what? Something's going on, is it? All right. Yeah, back to work. It was nothing to do with us. All right. So just chill out about the rights of these kind of constitutional documents. Now, obviously, it did enshrine the formation of the Parliament, and the rest is history, so to speak. Or I'll have to cover that. I mean, it's so vast, I'll cover it in another day. But these are the rights that people sometimes get down the wrong rabbit hole in relation to, because you have things like the Constitution, Magna Carta, you have the Bill of Rights with the Declaration of Rights, and all these things. People start reading, and what they're reading is not not necessarily always people's rights, because the law of England is very, very simple, and it was the law of the people, the law of the Anglo-Saxons, which allowed the Magna Carta to be enshrined in such a way. And it's those laws have not gone anywhere, believe it or not. Again, I'll go into this in a lot more detail in another video, but essentially the law of the people versus the law of the nobility, the establishment, the legal society, and all the others are two very different things. So when you're in court and you're reading about all the things about persons, about my constitutional rights, about my human rights is another big thing. I mean, Magna Carta Part 2 is the Declaration of Human Rights post World War II. These are all very lovely documents, obviously, but they are not always necessarily relating to you as a flesh and blood man on planet Earth. So I think a lot of the information relating to free man on the land and things that came before can get into, especially like John Harris, for example, the British Constitution Group, for example. They're all trying. You can't take that away. They are trying to get to the truth of the matter so that the people can be empowered to stop being oppressed where they feel oppression is happening, which is fine. It's obviously a noble goal by its very definition. That's a very noble cause. But unfortunately, if you're getting information wrong and you're spreading it out there as truth, then people can get taken down the garden path. I mean, like John Harris, for example, who's obviously passed now. He did a great job. I mean, he's one of the first people I came across, and a lot of his information I took to heart. But obviously, it transpires a lot of his information was almost spot on, and then a lot of it was going down the garden path. So here again, the birth certificate thing. Now I'm putting the birth certificate on hold. Whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, whether it enslaves you, whether it sets you free. I mean, there's all kinds of schools of thought, and the reason that is because we didn't create it. The only person who knows what the birth certificate actually means, or what it actually is for, or what it actually does, are the people who created it, the context in which they created it, and any rules or constitutional guidelines for the purpose for which it was intended. Okay, now I didn't create birth certificates. I'm not privy to any of that information, and I'm not a trustee. I have no say over what birth certificates are and how they relate to, I don't know, global slavery. I don't know, whatever you want to say. But let's just put that whole thing on the back burner, and let's just look specifically when you're invited into court. Let's keep our heads down at the ground. Let's not bring in lizards or super mutants or I don't know, whatever you want to, reptiles, aliens. Let's just keep it, it's a room with 4 walls and some people acting in certain parts in a court. Yeah, let's keep your mind on the game, I suppose. Let's bring it back to the tennis analogy. Yeah, let's not start thinking about distractions. You've got a one-on-one in a tennis match. We've got to get this. We've got to get this problem resolved. So this falsely imprisoned, wrongly imprisoned. Maybe it was your lack of knowledge about what's actually going on that maybe disrupted their game, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe it's how you carried yourself into court. Maybe you were being confrontational. Maybe you're being argumentative. Maybe you weren't making a clear enough point to get the other people on side, because you have to have a meeting of the minds. If someone's done wrong, or if someone's, a bit surprised by your attitude, or you're not playing along with how they expected you to play along with, and you're being very confrontational, then there's going to be friction there immediately. You're going to have confrontation. So you need to make sure you have a meeting of the minds with these people. You're no threat to them. They're no threat to you. We're all going to get on like a bunch of Fonzies, and things are going to get resolved amicably. And you're going to set the record straight, and we can all go about our day in a happy utopian way. Oh, let's go back to our good friend here.
Legal fictions.
John Harrower, stroke John King.
Name, Mr. John Harrower, which is not who I am, and I have verified in law that my...
Okay, so verified is a good word. It's a word that Robess uses a lot. Verified basically is, instead of verified, specifically relates to certified. Okay, so verified means that a man will come in and swear to it to be true. Certified means at some point in time that was existed truthfully, like a document, for example. At some point in time that was real, but it's not verified. So there can be some sort of room for manoeuvre on certified things, whereas verified, if I verify that this document is bona fide and legitimate, that means I'll obviously come in and swear to its authenticity in court, and ultimately I'll be held liable for any mistake with that if I'm verifying it in such a way, because you have to go in and testify to that fact. Whereas a certify is not quite as intense in terms of the purgatory, no, not purgatory, what am I saying? Perjury. God, excuse my language. Perjury rules associated with it, because you can withdraw from it, which is quite often happens with things like affidavits mysteriously disappearing from case files. Like people withdraw their statements, people withdraw this, that, and the other, because they don't want to obviously incriminate themselves in certain when legal or lawful cases start going pear-shaped. Let's just look at this little thing here. A capitalized name with an optional title represents a legal fiction known as person. Men and women do not have uppercase letters in their names or titles. Well, we don't have titles. Titles are granted by someone. Right? The Queen creates the titles in our land, in England, in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, so no one gets missed out. Right? Okay. And capitalization of names is actually, this is not entirely correct, because we do write our names with a capital letter. And I'll explain why. Dear, I've done that wrong, haven't I? Now, this hairy biker has had his word of the month up for some time now. So the word of the month was capitalization. I don't know if I've been through this on a previous video. I think it was in the it may have been in the Charlie Gard videos that I was making. Yeah, it was in the Charlie Gard videos, I remember now. So you got capitalization of names is a Roman law style of doing things. So you got minimum, I'll have a medium ice cream, I'll have a minimum ice cream, and I'll have a maximum. Would you like to go maximum on your ice cream or your coffee, sir? Yes, please. So you got small, medium, and large, basically. Now, small, like here, it's explained that John Doe would be a person who's own master. Okay, but in some instances, this is incorrect, because this is like an entity that's not come from Doe. It's just John, and he's almost would have had to have named himself John. It doesn't really fit any logical or natural scheme of natural culturally defined scheme of things in terms of naming people. Okay. It's here we go. So minima is John Doe here, where you have a capital J and a capital D. Now the reason you do that is because, as free and as at liberty that you may be or think you are, your mum and dad actually created you. Okay, and the whole idea is that someone created your mum and dad, and someone created them, and so on and so forth, and so on up through the ages till presumably you got to Adam and Eve or something like that, depending on the cultural belief of your society. So whether you're in Japan, you might think something. In Africa, you might think something. In Aborigines in Australia might think something. Invariably, it goes back to some sort of pagan belief. But obviously, in the biblical sense of the word, It may be Adam and Eve, and in some sort of, some sort of scientist point of view, you might believe it was a big bang and lots of primordial soup, and from the soup, you have organisms. But the point of the matter is, they're probably all wrong. Okay, they might all be wrong. So, in any case, all we know is the here and now. Today and now is all we know. So today, John Doe. It is taken for granted, and I'm pretty sure John Doe knows that he had a mum and dad married mum, and they became Mr. and Mrs. Doe, if you like. So John is John with a capital J, and D with a capital D is because he's of the Doe family, yeah? He's got loads of money, presumably. So that's why he has a capital D. It relates to his duties to his family. He is of, like in Ireland, Patrick O'Malley, Patrick of Malley. He is of the clan of the tribe of Malley. So John Doe is obviously John of the Does. So yes, if his dad calls upon him to do something, and he's obviously a minor or under 18, hey John, you need to go out there and cut the grass, John, or Dad's going to get upset. Guess what John does? He cuts the grass because he has a responsibility to the Doe family. That's why you have a D, which is capitalised, and a J, because he's been named by the Does. His mum and dad named him. So that's basically it. So that's why it contradicts the small Ds and the small Js, is because it's kind of like you maybe didn't know your parents, but then how would you have got your name? So it's why it becomes a bit tricky. I mean, you self-named yourself and you don't know who your parents are, and you kind of just popped into existence. Yeah. Bit tricky that. So then there's other ways of doing your name, which you can go to broadmind.org and just try and get a feel for why a capitalised DOE at the back, a medium loss of status, and then a maximum loss of, this is capitalisation maxima, which is a most comprehensive loss of status. Okay, so whenever you see your name capitalised, someone's trying to remove your status. But anyway, I digress. Let's go back to our lovely John Harrower video. So that's what that means. So yeah, I mean, you do have capitalised names. The first letter should be capitalised because I think Robess is Sproul. His surname is Sproul. So I'm sure he's quite proud of the fact that his mum and dad gave him the name Sproul. So by all means, Rob Sproul didn't create Sprouls. He's inherited that title from his forefathers. So put a capital S on that just out of respect. And then Robert is his dad and his mum, and named him Robert, so out of respect for your mum and dad, put a capital R on that. There's nothing wrong with that. If you start doing lowercase Robert Sproul, then that all changes. And titles, obviously titles. The reason people give you titles, or they have to write you in titles, is because they want to write you in a defined manner. They want to write to you within a defined parameters. Okay, so that's the whole titles of Mr. and Mrs. Now, these are titles. So when you get written to as a title, and it happens to me all the time, because I never write out as Mr. So-and-so, I always write out just with my name. But then I get a letter back saying, "Oh, dear Mr. Smith, well, thank you for your letter." Now, it's either out of a sign of respect, like you say, "Yes, sir, no, sir." But, I try to be like one-on-one with people, man to man, so to speak. Let's crack on with this video. It's a very interesting one. It will conclude with a finale.
My name is John Harrower without a title and without uppercase letters.
So you can imagine immediately going into court and saying, "I'm here without title, without uppercase letters," and the judge is like, "Oh my, hang on, this is tennis, mate. Yeah, I'm here with shuttlecocks and da, 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 da," and he's not even, he's not really explaining. Well, he's proclaiming what he's doing there. And it's like, "No, you're answering our summons to play tennis." And he's like, no, I've got shuttlecocks here. We're getting it on with shuttlecocks and badminton rackets. Here we go. We're going to play badminton, judge. You watch this. No, you didn't create this court, buddy. The other party created this court. They've defined the rules. You can't change their rules because they paid for the venue. They invited you in. They're expecting you to play ball. In this case, tennis, not badminton.
Justice of the Peace Stuart Fair made the claim that.
Look, Stuart, you're a good guy, Stuart. I'm not gonna have anything bad to say about Stuart. Putting people, name and shaming and put people's faces on the internet. Yeah. Okay, fine. If that's what makes you happy.
And Adrian Fraser was the Procurator Fiscal, accepting legal advice, a legal entity known as person, and in which case I would essentially be accepting the uppercase name. This is obviously a crime in Scots common law, which goes under the name of personation. Essentially, this.
Right, they seem to be like giving out advice here in a way, of defining stuff. As a matter of fact, Scots common law I've never heard of. I mean, it's just common law. I mean, it's common law to the Scottish people. You know, it's common to the Scottish culture, but it's not Scots common law, as far as I'm aware. It's like English common law. You know, English common law is common law to the legal society in England. Scots common law would presumably, if there was a separate legal society, it'd be the Scottish legal society's common law, Scots common law, English common law. So yeah, it's not. It's common law of the people that happen to be upon the planet at a particular point called Scotland.
Video is an appeal for those watching it to come along to Alloa Sheriff Court. It's 47 Drysdale Street in Alloa at 10 a.m. On Wednesday.
So this is something else I'm not too keen on, is calling in the boys, calling out on the internet. Come on, guys, let's come down. Let's do a court takeover. I don't know if it was Roger Hayes. I think it was Roger Hayes and the British Constitution Group, or certain people around the Merseyside, Manchester area that took over that court. They had to close the court. The police kicked everyone out, and the crowd was shouting into the courtroom, "Do your job, or something along those lines. So, yeah, let's not call in the mob. Let's not incite. I mean, they're not technically, but you know what they're doing.
The 19th of July.
The thing of the matter is, people, it's important that people turn up at this court because these courts are getting away with it, and the staff in these courts are getting away with corporate criminality, which is unlawful. It's not right what's happening to this man. He should never have been put in prison. Unfortunately, the day that he was up, I couldn't turn up. We weren't expecting him to get falsely imprisoned, but that's what happened. There's a lot of people out there following my channel. There's a lot of people following me on Facebook. A lot of people understand what I do, and there's a lot of people don't. But for the people...
Yeah, I understand what Rob's doing. He's trying to help his fellow man out. He's trying to get rid of any kind of capitalization over your fellow man by bamboozling them with terms of art, inviting them into a court that they're not competent to stand, making them stand, and then having your wicked way with them. Yeah, that's basically what Rob's trying to do. Now, there's another video. So this is them essentially calling for help, saying, look, we're going to go to court. This guy's got a court date. We'd like some backup. And I think a few days later, John Harrower, I think it was a week later or something. There we go, John Harrower.
We filmed the Procurator Fiscal. It's came to our attention now that the manager has changed, right? The one that was there before obstructed the documents being issued is not there. It seems to...
So you can see he's obviously a bit pissed off here. But I'll abbreviate what he's done. I think basically Rob turned up to court. They weren't even allowed in court. The court weren't accepting documents. John Harrower, John King, whichever one he goes by, was essentially in and around outside the courtroom. I think he might have gone in and immediately basically got, within a very short amount of time, was arrested for contempt of court and given 2 weeks in jail. Now obviously I've gone over the reasons why. I hope that's kind of clear in your mind why that might have happened. But I was very concerned by this, and thankfully a bit of time later he got let out. And John Harrower got let out of prison. I think he's out and about later. And in fact, John Harrower...
Making this video to make you aware that Robert Sproul is currently in the custody of the corporation known as Police Scotland.
So there we go, we're attacking this corporation identity. You know, like a corporation's a bad thing. Corporations have been created to help aid and assist mankind, okay? So when they don't aid and assist mankind, or they do harm to them, there's obviously they all have to be insured in case such things happen. So, I mean, corporations, yes, corporations, no. Again, birth certificates, yes, birth certificates, who cares? Let's just move on to the facts of the matter. So, he got out of prison, and then quickly afterwards, Robert got arrested, and he got put in prison for contempt of court. I'm not going to show the reason why he got contempt of court, but it's on Rob's website. And the reason he got put in contempt of court was because he went into the tennis match specifically. He was playing tennis in the tennis match as a badminton player, and then he whipped out, on match point, he whipped out his badminton racket and he starts messing up the game. So if you've committed to be in a tennis game and you start changing the rules mid-flow, or you don't agree to the rules that you have been quite happily playing along all the way through, that's what's going to give you a contempt of court. Now, when we first heard that Rob had been stuck in prison for contempt of court, the initial reaction I had is, what a load of bollocks, as we all do, because we're all concerned about Robert. But then I found the video that he posted online recording a judge in a family court setting, and family court is defined that you can't take video recordings into family court for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. When you set up a court, you define the rules for it, and the rules are clearly defined in family court. So if you go marching in there recording and then posting it on social media, then they're going to be able to issue an arrest warrant for you for contempt of court, as did happen with Rob. He got put in prison. Now, I was a bit concerned about Rob, and thankfully he did get let out, and the contempt of court was dropped, which is fantastic. I won't go into too much details why that, and it was changed retrospectively, which is bizarre. If I stab you with a knife, I've done a crime, and then if I retrospectively, I didn't mean to stab you, I meant to shoot you. You can't change what has been done. But obviously in legal land, they love to bend their own rules. But obviously in law, that stuff doesn't stick to the wall. So anyway, so he's not been contempt of courted now. He's been statutory breach of the peace. I think it was 84.84 statutory breach of the peace, which is fantastic. But anyway, that's fun and games that Rob's got to get on with. So he's going to be very busy over the next coming weeks and months, holding these people down. Because this is how you beat people. You beat them at their own game. The moment they step outside of their role, as soon as that man acting as McEnroe, or that man acting as umpire, jumps out of character and starts becoming, less, not being the tennis player, being a racing car driver. Oh, now you're in contempt of court. And then you'd be like, well, hang on, how am I in contempt of court? I made this court. Oh, I don't care, mate. The reason the lady who's often portrayed as a, Lady Justice, if you like. Let's have an image, see if there she is. See? Boom, lovely. Now the reason she's blind, and the reason she's holding scales, and most importantly of all, the reason she's holding a sword, is because just because you create a court and you bring a case to court, doesn't mean she's not going to stab that sword right into your head. If you tell lies, if you deceive the court, if you don't play by the rules, if you act unlawfully, there's no reason whatsoever why that sword can't fall on your own head. And you fall on your own sword. So she's holding scales. She's waiting for the balance. There has to be a tipping point. There has to be evidence, proof beyond reasonable doubt that this has happened. Okay, and therefore your judgment is upheld, and you get a judgment in your favour. But just as easily, it can go the other way. So this is, in the olden days, if you brought bear false witness against thy neighbour, it's harking back to ancient times, but that sword would quite quickly come down on your head and chop your head off. It was quite often death. To waste the king's time, waste everyone's time, was just like, what the hell are you doing? Do you think the king is going to have patience for fools? Do not suffer fools. Yeah. So that's why the lady, she's blind to status. So whether it's the king on one side of the scales or it's a peasant on the other, she's not seeing your riches, your wealth, your status, your class. Yeah? She's holding the scale, she's waiting for the justice to be balanced one way or the other based on the facts and the evidence and the testimony. And then the sword is obviously death or punishment, whichever way that you look at it. And you can also look at the scales of there needs to be a rebalancing. And rebalancing is always a tricky one. What is appropriate punishment or what is appropriate compensation? It's not always as simple as it may appear to get the right amount of compensation. Now, from you and I's point of view, in monetary terms for compensation, we have to claim exactly to the penny what is due, or what we believe is due, and not a penny more and not a penny less. Well, you can go less if you're going to forgive some of the debt, but definitely not a penny more. And that's basically what's going on. So this judge has tried to retrospectively stick stuff back in the scales to make it, I didn't mean that, I meant that. Nah, judge, you've done it. You played high stakes game. You've stepped out of character. You've made a mistake. Speak to Rob, ask for forgiveness, get yourself all squared with Rob. Otherwise, Rob, by all rights, and as a fellow man who's been arrested and stuck in a cell, you stuck a man in a cell. All right, you stuck him in a cage, and you're trying to change the reason why you did it. Yeah, that's not really the act of a noble man. That's an act of a shrew. That's a weasel of a man. So anyway, let's keep an eye on Robess. Let's support him all we can. But fingers crossed. Good old Rabbi of Scotland will get there one day. He's definitely pressing the right buttons. But let's just try and hope and pray that he stays out of prison and doesn't get the wrong kind of attention from the legal society. But again, all I would say about Rob is, he's doing the right thing. He just needs to less finger pointing, less confrontation. Everything's fine.